It was a crisp, early morning in the heart of Washington, D.C. The sun was just beginning to break through the clouds, casting an amber glow on the city's iconic monuments. But inside the bustling newsroom of a major liberal news network, a storm was brewing. The hum of computers and the rustle of papers filled the air, but there was an unmistakable tension that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just another broadcast day. Something big was about to happen, something no one had anticipated. Karoline Leavitt, a rising political star known for her sharp wit and unrelenting stance on conservative values, had just been invited onto the program of one of the most outspoken liberal reporters in the country. The host, known for his biting sarcasm and no-holds-barred approach, had one agenda for the day: to prove that the narrative surrounding former President Donald Trump's influence on American politics was still a dangerous one. And he was determined to make Karoline squirm. The camera lights blinked on, and the host wasted no time. "Karoline, let's start with the basics," he began, his voice dripping with calculated confidence. "You're here to defend a man who incited an insurrection, a man who led the country into chaos. Why do you think this is still a narrative worth defending?" The question hung in the air, and for a brief moment it felt as though the entire room held its breath. But Karoline Leavitt, poised and ready for anything, did not flinch. She'd been preparing for this moment her whole career, and she was about to prove that not every story told about Donald Trump was what it seemed. With a smile that could cut through steel, she leaned forward into the microphone. "You're talking about the narrative, right? The one you've been selling for years? The one where everything Trump did was wrong, and anyone who supported him was complicit in an insurrection?" She let the words hang in the air. "Well, I'm here to destroy it. Live, right here, right now." The audience, both in the studio and at home, sat in stunned silence. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice through. No one was expecting what was coming next. Karoline had just launched the first salvo in what was about to become a political showdown that would leave viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about Trump, the media, and the country's political landscape. And it was all happening live, on the air. The stakes were high, and Karoline Leavitt was just getting started. The challenge hit like a lightning bolt. The host's question was merely the beginning. It was designed to rattle, to provoke, an attempt to throw Karoline off balance. But what he didn't anticipate was that his sharp words would be the spark that ignited the fire within her. Karoline's entire career had been shaped by moments like this. She knew the game. She'd seen the reporters twist facts, spin narratives, and plant seeds of doubt. But this time, something felt different. As the host pushed forward with his relentless barrage of questions, Karoline could feel her pulse quicken. The liberal network's narrative wasn't just flawed, it was dangerous. She knew the stakes of the conversation were higher than anyone realized. But she also knew the truth had to be spoken, no matter the cost. "I'm not here to defend Donald Trump in the way you think I am," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "I'm here to destroy your false narrative. And I'm not going to sit here and let you keep telling people lies about him, about America, and about everything we stand for." The host paused, clearly taken aback by the fierceness of her response. Karoline's words weren't just bold, they were a direct challenge to everything he'd spent years promoting. It was the first time anyone had ever publicly confronted him in such a direct and confident way. He had expected a back and forth, but Karoline was playing a different game. The room seemed to hold its breath. The makeup artist paused mid-application. The cameramen were frozen behind their lenses, and even the producers in the control room were watching in stunned silence. But Karoline wasn't thinking about them. Her mind was racing with everything that had brought her to this moment. The backdoor meetings, the late-night strategizing with her closest allies, people like Thomas, her trusted communications director, and Rachel, her fiery campaign manager, who had always pushed her to aim higher. They were on the other end of the phone line, watching from their offices. "You've been preparing for this, haven't you?" Thomas had said just that morning, his voice laced with cautious optimism. "Don't let them control the narrative. You control it. Just make sure you're ready for the fallout." And now, here it was. The fallout was already starting, and it was far bigger than anything she had imagined. For the first time in her career, Karoline was about to take the fight directly to the people, not just to win an argument, but to win back the truth. The narrative she had long fought against was now her enemy, and she couldn't back down. Not now. The host's next words came as a sharp rebuttal, but Karoline barely heard them. The world outside the studio seemed to fade away as she focused on one thing. The battle she was about to wage wasn't just for Trump's legacy. It was for the future of the nation itself. And it started right now. The moment Karoline had feared was upon her. What began as an opportunity to challenge the dominant narrative quickly spiraled into something much more complicated. As the host launched into a new line of questioning, his voice dripped with sarcasm. "So, Karoline, let's get this straight. You believe the entire country was misled? That the media, myself included, have lied about Trump's role in January 6th, about his rhetoric, and everything he's done since? Are you telling me, and the millions of viewers watching, that you think we've all been brainwashed?" The Yafur audience in the studio chuckled, some in disbelief, others in mockery. The host's tone was confident, almost as if he had anticipated this moment from the start, as if he knew exactly how to force Karoline into a corner. He was good, better than good. But Karoline wasn't backing down. Her grip on the edge of the table tightened, and she forced herself to maintain eye contact, to show no weakness. This was what they had been preparing for, right? To fight back against the media, to speak the truth no matter the consequences. But something gnawed at her. A voice in the back of her head whispered, "Are you sure?" The doubt came unexpectedly. She had always prided herself on knowing where she stood, on being confident in her beliefs. But the host's line of attack was relentless, and the tension in the room was starting to feel suffocating. The media landscape was complex, and the story they were spinning around Trump had massive consequences. What if she wasn't doing enough to dismantle the lies? What if this one conversation wasn't enough to shift public opinion, to change the way people saw the former president? Rachel's face flashed in her mind. Her campaign manager had always warned her, "You're not just going up against the media, Karoline. You're fighting a culture, an entire movement." Was Rachel right? Had she underestimated the scope of the battle? Her heart pounded in her chest. But just as the self-doubt threatened to overtake her, something inside her snapped back into focus. This was bigger than a single conversation. This was bigger than a network trying to trap her into an ideological box. This was about truth, about defending the narrative that had been buried beneath so many layers of distortion. "Let me correct you," Karoline finally responded, her voice firm once more. "I'm not saying the country's been brainwashed. I'm saying the narrative you've been pushing is a lie. And it's time to stop pretending that everyone who disagrees with you is some kind of villain." The room went quiet. There it was, her counterpunch. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. But as the host sat back, the tension in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't done yet. Far from it. Karoline knew that this moment was just a prelude to something bigger, something she hadn't fully anticipated. And as the segment continued, the media's narrative was only going to get more vicious. For the first time in a long while, Karoline felt the weight of what she was up against. The words were out, but the battle was far from over. Karoline's statement had hung in the air, a direct challenge to everything the host and his network represented. Yet, as the seconds passed, the tension in the studio only grew heavier. The audience, still silent, was unsure of what would come next. It wasn't just the host who was reeling from Karoline's response. It was everyone in that room. She had just thrown the gauntlet down, but she knew something he didn't. She wasn't just fighting a news anchor. She was fighting an entire media machine, but it was the sudden, unexpected twist that shifted everything. The host, usually quick with retorts and poised for a comeback, froze. A few awkward seconds passed, and then a quiet murmur went through the control room. Karoline caught a flicker of panic on the host's face, something she hadn't anticipated. He was rattled. This wasn't part of the script. Then, the unthinkable happened. The producer in the control room made an urgent call, and the host, recovering his composure, leaned forward. "We've just received new information," he said, his voice suddenly more serious. "It seems there's been a development regarding Trump that you might find interesting." Karoline's heart skipped a beat. New information? The host glanced at the teleprompter, clearly stalling, as though waiting for something or someone to cue him. But Karoline was on edge now. What was going on? The walls of the studio seemed to close in on her. She had seen how this game was played, how media outlets often pivoted when they realized they were losing control of the narrative. But this felt different, like a trap was being set. "I'm going to put it out there," the host continued, his eyes narrowing. "We've just learned that there may be a bombshell coming out soon, something no one saw coming, a new piece of evidence that could change everything you've just argued." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. Was this a tactic to discredit her? To throw her off balance? Or was it something bigger? The sense of uncertainty grew. Could the story she was defending be in danger of unraveling right before her eyes? The host leaned back, watching her closely, as if waiting for her to bite. His eyes gleamed with a challenge, knowing full well that this moment would shift the conversation in ways she couldn't yet predict. "Are you prepared for what's about to come out?" he asked, his voice laced with something that almost resembled satisfaction. "Because it seems your defense of Trump might be a little harder to sell after today." Karoline's mind raced. The threat was clear now. Her carefully constructed defense was on the verge of being torn down. The foundation she had built her argument on was shaky. Could the new information truly change everything? But something inside her shifted in that moment. The unease that had gripped her earlier was replaced by a new clarity. This was the turning point. This was the test of everything she stood for. With a deep breath, she straightened her posture, looking the host square in the eye. "I've spent my life standing up for the truth, and I'm not about to stop now. Whatever this new information is, it won't change what I know. And I'm here to make sure the truth gets out, no matter what happens next." The host's smile faltered for a second. The room held its breath again. Karoline knew she couldn't afford to hesitate now. This wasn't just about defending Trump. It was about defending the very principles she had been fighting for. The real test was about to begin. And whatever came next, Karoline Leavitt was ready. The studio felt like a pressure cooker. The air was thick with anticipation as the host leaned back in his chair, giving Karoline an almost predatory grin. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like never before. She could hear the faint hum of the cameras, the rustle of the crew behind the scenes. But all that noise faded as she focused solely on him, the man across from her who was determined to dismantle everything she had fought for. The host's voice broke the silence. "Well, Karoline, I think it's time we reveal what we've been holding back." He nodded to someone behind the scenes, and a split second later, a clip began to play on the studio monitors. It was a hidden video, taken from a source deep within Trump's inner circle. The footage was grainy, and the sound was distorted, but there was no mistaking the context. The video appeared to show Trump, just before the January 6th Capitol riot, speaking with one of his closest advisors. His words were hard to make out, but the tone was unmistakably angry, full of fiery rhetoric. The clip seemed to confirm the narrative that Trump had indeed incited the violence. Karoline's pulse spiked. For a moment, the room blurred around her, and a sinking feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. This was the bombshell. This was the information she'd been warned about. The host, sensing her moment of hesitation, seized it. "Now, Karoline, how do you respond? This footage, this evidence, seems to contradict everything you've been saying. It looks like the truth is finally catching up." Her heart pounded, but Karoline didn't allow herself to flinch. She had seen how this game was played. The media was skilled at creating illusions, at twisting narratives to fit a preconceived agenda. She had been ready for this. She shot him a cool, defiant glance. That clip, like so many others, has been edited to tell a specific story. You see what you want to see. But let me be clear. I'm not here to defend a man. I'm here to defend the truth. The host blinked, momentarily thrown by her unshakable resolve. But Karoline was just getting started. She had done her homework, and she had seen the full, uncut footage. What the media was presenting wasn't the full picture. It was a carefully curated narrative designed to fit their agenda. "Do you really think," she continued, her voice steady but fierce, "that one clip, taken out of context, is enough to invalidate everything else we know? To invalidate the thousands of hours of research, The voices of millions of Americans who saw something different. Her words hit with the force of a tidal wave. You're trying to create a story, not tell the truth. The full footage shows a man who was passionate, yes, but who never once incited violence. The story you want to tell doesn't match the reality. And I will not sit here and let you erase the truth. The host's confident facade began to crack. He had prepared for Karoline to back down, to show weakness. But she had turned the tables. With each word she spoke, the room seemed to grow smaller, as if she were the only one in it. The tension was palpable, but Karoline could feel the momentum shifting in her favor. She wasn't just defending Trump anymore. She was defending the integrity of her beliefs, her vision for the country, and the power of a free press that wasn't beholden to falsehoods. The host opened his mouth, perhaps to respond, but Karoline cut him off, leaning forward. You want a bombshell? Here, it is. The truth you're peddling isn't the truth. It's a carefully constructed narrative that you've been pushing for years, and I'm done playing by your rules. The camera zoomed in on her face as she delivered the final blow. The studio was dead silent, every person in the room hanging on her words. For the first time, Karoline wasn't just reacting to the narrative being fed to her. She was creating her own. The host sat back, visibly shaken. The game had shifted, and Karoline had won the most important round. The studio was still, but the storm was far from over. Karoline knew this was only the beginning. But in that moment, she had delivered the emotional and narrative peak of the battle, a moment she would never forget. And the world watching would never look at her the same way again. The segment ended, but the story was far from over. As the cameras cut, the studio erupted into motion. The crew scrambled to reset, the producer gave Karoline a quick thumbs up, and the host, now visibly flustered, stood from his chair. The dynamic in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a fiery showdown had ended with Karoline, standing tall, unshaken, and resolute. She had done it. She had stood her ground, not just defending Trump, but dismantling the very narrative the host had so carefully constructed. Her words had cracked the facade, and in that moment, she knew she'd done something bigger than winning a TV argument. She had reclaimed the narrative, and for once, the media wasn't in control. Behind the scenes, Thomas and Rachel were already on the phone, their voices filled with excitement and relief. You nailed it, Thomas said, his tone laced with pride. That was a masterclass. In control. Not just a win, Rachel added, her voice sharp and determined. You changed the conversation. You pushed back against the machine, and now they'll have to reckon with it. Karoline felt the weight of their words. She had come to realize that this moment was about more than one debate. It was about shifting the tides. The mainstream media, the narratives they pushed, the way they shaped reality. It all had to be challenged. She wasn't just fighting for Trump's legacy. She was fighting for the voices that were often silenced by the loudest, most powerful narratives in the room. The next few days were a whirlwind. Headlines popped up across the country, some in praise, others in condemnation. But it didn't matter. Karoline had done what she set out to do. She'd disrupted the status quo. She'd given a voice to the millions who were tired of being told what to think, what to believe, and what was true. Her political career had just reached a new level. But more importantly, she had proven something to herself. That truth, courage, and conviction could take on even the most formidable forces. As she walked out of the studio, the early evening sun painted the Washington skyline in hues of orange and gold. Karoline smiled to herself, the weight of the day lifting off her shoulders. She had made her mark, and there was no going back. In that moment, she knew this was just the beginning of a much larger fight. But she was ready, and the world, whether it knew it or not, was about to see a new kind of political warrior. This isn't over, Karoline whispered under her breath, her voice steady with resolve. It's only just begun.